it was like a real great example of like everyone saying you can't do that, it's too expensive, it looks weird, like they hadn't seen something like that before, like what's these big zippers and it really came down to like we believe in it.
Only real content is gonna last. All that other nonsense is here today and gone tomorrow.
Just like as a fan, really, like I really right now, matter of fact, I want to know how we got here. Like,
Like,
what was the inspiration? Like, did the joggers come first? How did we get the fabric? Like,
stitch patterns, like what would
the different silos.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, just like I want to know about Nike Tech.
If you really want to know I'll tell you the super long story, but years before Tech Fleece came out, there was a small capsule in NSW, capsule collection in NSW called Tech Pack. And Tech Pack was like kind of technical classics remix. They were really dope. And that kind of like came out, didn't really blow up, but it was really cool. And then it kind of went on the back shelf. And then when this Tech Pack, Tech Fleece and all that came out, basically the business was like, how do we grow fleece? Like fleece is like the biggest classification in the athletic world, right? Like sweatshirts and joggers, and for any athletic company, that's the foundation. But up to that point, like fleece was like super, hadn't changed in like 100 years. It felt like it was just like basic fleece.
right.
It was like cotton poly. Just at the same time, we were doing a small collection called Made in Italy in sportswear, which was really, really, really expensive. Like tiny distribution. Like in New York, you could get it at like Mercer and a few spots. That was it. And um, the apparel team that was working on that had brought back this crazy spacer mesh fleece, which had this really like rigid, like it really held its body really great. And that's where the fabric came from. It came from the Made in Italy collection, but that was so small, it didn't have any scale. So this guy Joe Serino, who really was like the business visionary behind NSW, he led all the product engine. Um, he was like, "There's something in this fabric," and then a couple other people, Charlie Holmes, who was the design director at the time, like everyone was just like, there's something in that. It's got this really interesting hand, it's modern, and that's where it grew from, that one kind of niche piece in Made in Italy. And then it got, the original collection was like 5 silhouettes. It wasn't just one thing. It was an N98 track jacket, it was the AW77 kind of hoodie, it was the jogger, it was a crew, and literally like it was all one fabrication. It was just a couple iconic silhouettes, and like we didn't have a name or anything. It was only until like the last minute where it was like, what do we call this? And that's where we took the old name Tech Pack and put it, kind of repurposed that name for this collection. And then it was like way more expensive. It was like 30% more expensive than normal fleece. There was like a lot of like crazy things about it where we presented that collection. This is kind of like behind the scenes story, but at Nike, you kind of take your collection every season, you kind of present it to Nike's kind of like merchants and the buyers, if you will, right? Like Nike's kind of like its own world where it has its own buyers that buy for its stores, and they're not buyers, but you know what I mean. And so we did this big presentation, and people were like, "Nah, it's too expensive." Like a lot of people didn't like embrace it. It was like, it was kind of like, yeah, it was kind of like it was very polarizing. A lot of people in the company were kind of like, "Yeah, I don't know." And to NSW's leadership, like Joe Serino and some of those people, they're like, "Fuck it, we're making it." Like, and so, it was like a real great example of like everyone saying you can't do that, it's too expensive, it looks weird, like they hadn't seen something like that before, like what's these big zippers, and it really came down to like we believe in it. You know what I mean? So kudos to Joe and the business, and they got it placed in like some Nike direct doors, you know, just some Nike owned doors, and dude, it blew up. I mean, it just went like people on the street saw it and just went, yeah, more of that.
Right.
And it's a, you know, to this day, I still look at that example of like, you know, there's a famous quote from Henry Ford, right? You might have heard this. Like, you know, Henry Ford was like, hey, if I asked, you know, people what they wanted, go back to, you know, Henry Ford days. He's like, if I asked people what they wanted, they'd tell me faster horses. They wouldn't have said a car, right? They wouldn't have said an automobile. They would have said, just give me a faster horse that maybe, you know, doesn't need as much food, right? Like, and so I think it just reminds you like vision and like doing shit that hasn't been done is hard. Like people don't always see. And that's why I think, you know, entrepreneurs, creative people, like creativity isn't just creative. Like Joe Serino, the guy who led the product engine in the business, was an amazing creative person, right? So creativity is like across everything, especially when you're talking about having a vision and doing something that hadn't been done. And you gotta like overcome the no's. There's gonna be a lot of no's. Like people are just like, nah, I don't think so. Nah, I don't like it. You gotta kind of just be tenacious and just kind of persevere. So yeah, I mean that was an amazing project. I mean it was super satisfying to be a part of that and to, you know, to play a role. It definitely, you know, there's a couple projects at Nike that were, you know, kind of breakthroughs that you kind of, you know, like I was saying earlier, you kind of see the world all of a sudden. You're like in Tokyo and there's like 1 million people wearing this thing and you're just like, damn, it's crazy. And you know, you see like freaking Vogue magazine style it with like a, you know, like a dope camel top coat with like tech fleece and like, you know, you just see super cool shit where you're like, I never like in my wildest dreams would have seen this thing, like just, and it's really satisfying, you know.